Hello, my name is Kindson Munonye, and thank you for joining me as we begin our discussion on the third process in the process scope management knowledge area. And today we are going to be looking at define scope. Define scope follows from plan scope management and then collect requirements. Using the requirements that have been collected, a scope statement have to be created, and this is done during define scope process. Today we are going to examine what define scope process is all about. The define scope process selects the final project requirement from the requirements documentation and delivered during the collect requirement process. So during the collect requirement process, using various tools and techniques, requirements were collected and presented in the requirement documentation. Now, not all these requirements collected will be used in the defined scope or be used as part of the scope of the project. These requirements collected during collect requirement process have to be filtered, and the ones that actually will be used in the scope or be part of the scope of the project is selected, and that is what forms the scope. During the defined scope process, a detailed description of the project and product, service or result is established. During project planning, the project scope is defined and described with greater specificity as more information about the project is known. During scope definition, existing risks, assumptions, and constraints are analyzed for completeness and added or updated as necessary. Now, the defined scope process can be highly iterative. It means that it repeats itself from time to time. In an iterative lifecycle project, a high-level vision will be developed for all the overall project, but the detailed scope is determined one iteration at a time, and the detailed planning for the next iteration is carried out as work progresses on the current project scope and deliverables. Alright, define scope formally is the process of developing a detailed description of the project or product, and the key benefit of this process is that it describes the project, service or result boundaries by defining which of the requirements collected will be included in and excluded from the project scope. Alright, let's now take a look at the define scope ITTOs. The define scope ITTOs is what I'm presenting on this page. I need to... The ITTOs stand for Inputs, Tools and Techniques, and Outputs. The ITTOs: the Project Management Plan, the Project Charter, Requirement Documentation, and Organizational Process Assets. So we are talking of requirements documentation, not just requirements documents, although technically they can be the same. But by the PMBOK guide, we have requirements documentation, then we have organizational process assets, and for tools and techniques we have 4 items: expert judgment, product analysis, alternative generation, and facilitated workshops. Alright, so the outputs are the project scope statement and project document public. Let's look at these items closely to see if we can gain some insights. Alright, the inputs, the first one is scope management plan. Just a second. Is it the project management plan or the scope management plan? It's actually the scope management plan, not the project management plan, serves as the inputs, not the project management plan. We are talking about the scope management plan. So let me just correct this thing so that we can move on. So we are talking about the scope management plan. Alright, so the scope management plan is a component of the project management plan for sure, and establishes the activities for developing, monitoring, and controlling the project scope. We do need the project charter as input to define scope because it provides the high-level project description and product characteristics. It also contains project approval requirements. Organizations that do not produce a formal project charter will usually perform an informal analysis to identify the content necessary for further scope planning. So some organizations may not actually have a formal project charter. Alright, so requirements documentation is also an input to define scope. This is because this document will be used to select the requirements that will be included in the project. The final input is organizational process assets. Some of them might be policies, procedures, and templates for a project scope statement, project file from previous projects, and lessons learned from previous phases or projects. Let's now look at the tools and techniques. First, we have expert judgment. I'm not going to spend time explaining, but just know that expert judgment leverages on expertise of people that are very, very knowledgeable in the field. It may be consultants, subject matter experts, professionals, stakeholders. They can provide expert ideas that can help you get a good scope definition. We have product analysis as tools and techniques used to define scope for projects that have a product as deliverable as opposed to a service or result. Product analysis can be effective tool. Now, product analysis has to do with trying to get a clear understanding of the product and its characteristics. Each application area has one or more generally accepted methods for translating high-level product descriptions into tangible deliverables. The product analysis includes techniques such as product breakdown, system analysis, requirements analysis, system engineering, value engineering, and value analysis. All these are actually product analysis. They are aspects of product analysis. Alright, let's move on to the next tool and technique, and that is alternatives generation. Okay? Alternatives generation is a technique used to develop as many potential options as possible in order to identify different approaches to execute and perform the work of the project. A variety of general management techniques can be used, such as brainstorming, lateral thinking, analysis of alternatives, etc. So when we talk of alternative generation, we are looking at other options or other ways to achieve the same result. This is a tool and technique for defining scope. We consider three tools and techniques. One, expert judgment. We've discussed product analysis. We've also discussed alternative generation, and the fourth one, which is the final tool and technique, is facilitated workshops. We've discussed this when we examine the collect requirements process. So facilitated workshops is where key stakeholders or experts or key players with variety of expectations, they come together to discuss, to come to a consensus on the objectives and limits. So facilitated workshops can serve as a tool and technique, a very important tool and technique used to define scope. Let's now take a look at the outputs of defined scope. We'll say that there are two outputs for the defined scope process, and that is project scope statement and project documents updates, right? Project scope statement and project documents updates. Alright, so give me a second. Okay, so let's spend some time on project scope statement. The project scope statement is a description of the project scope, major deliverables, assumptions, constraints, and every other necessary detail. The project scope statement documents the entire scope, including project and product scope. So the project scope statement defines everything that is going to be included, all the work of the project is defined and specified clearly in the project scope. The project scope statement might include things like it describes in detail the project deliverables and the work required to create those deliverables. It provides a common understanding of the project scope among project stakeholders, contains explicit scope exclusions that can assist in managing stakeholder expectations. So, in the project scope statement, together with saying what should be in the scope, you also explicitly specify what is not in the scope. For instance, if you are going to build a bridge across a river in a metropolis, you can specify the length of the bridge, the rail for the both sides of the bridge, whether a dual carriage or quad carriage or single carriage. But you can also specify this project will not install street lights on the bridge. This project will not install reflectors on the bridge. So you actually specify exclusions or items that are not to be included in the project. The project scope statement also includes product scope description for projects that are undertaken to produce a project, progressively elaborates the characteristics of the product. That is product scope description. Acceptance criteria is also specified in the project scope statement. Acceptance criteria are a set of conditions that is required to be met before deliverables are accepted. Deliverable or deliverables, the unique and verifiable product, result, or capability to perform a service that is required to produce a complete a process, phase, or project. So deliverables. So let's give an example of a deliverable. Let's assume that you install IT infrastructure in a particular office. Maybe a 3-story building, and you have to install IT infrastructure like computer systems, printers, and other hardware. So deliverables will be installed computers, installed printers, network structured cabling of the building, and so on and so forth. So something tangible that you can tell a stakeholder or your sponsor or the customer, see it here. You can see I've done it. So look at it. Verify that it's correct. So the deliverable is something you can show for your work. Alright, the project scope statement also includes, we've mentioned project exclusions. It also includes constraints, limiting factors that affect the execution of the project or process. For instance, you can say this project will not use beyond so and so amount. Okay, this project will be carried out in 2 years, or maybe carried out in 18 months. So all these are constraints that has to be clearly specified in the project scope statement. And of course, assumptions. This project assumes that there's not going to be a tornado, there's not going to be a natural disaster, no earthquake, there's not going to be flood. So explicit assumptions is also may assume that the government will not interrupt the project work, and so on and so forth. Also, later we'll look at risk implication of certain assumptions that might be made. Alright, now the last output we've discussed as the output of the project scope statement is the project document update. You might have to update the project document. We've discussed project documents prior to this time, and they might include the stakeholder register, requirements documentation, change log, requirements traceability matrix, and so on and so forth. So update to this can be made. So with this, we are wrapping it up on the define scope process, and I hope you've learned much from my presentation. If you want me to make some improvement, please make comments right there below in the comments area, and be sure I'm going to attend to it. As usual, I'm going to take you right back to the ITTOs page so that you spend some time getting used to these ITTOs. Once again, thank you very much for viewing, and please join me in my next presentation as I'm going to start discussion of the next process in the scope management knowledge area, and that will be create WBS.